So before this semester, I didn't give assessment much thought, but I would say my philosophy, due to my background, would have been very traditional. I was in a very positivistic environment. So when I think of assessment, I think homework, quizzes, midterms, finals, sometimes projects. I succeeded in this environment, so I used to think of it more highly. But on reflection throughout the semester, I kind of realized that during my first degree that I myself am an experiential learner. That's how I come to understand things. And that's something I highly value over things like memory or application or processes. So after the semester, I would say my philosophy is leaning towards cognitivism, where like memories build on memories, but really I'm kind of more leaning towards like experiential. So assessment would look more like presentations, students teaching each other, labs, experiments, projects, and I'm really looking forward to doing like concept checks. Okay, so what is assessment? So before I was in education, I kind of thought assessment is your final grade, which not only reflects like your knowledge on the subject, it reflects like whether or not you're a good student. So it also reflects like your work ethic, kind of considering that part of getting your grade was doing your work and studying. Now in education, I understand that it's formative and summative. And formative assessment is for students to give them feedback so they know how they're progressing and what they need to do to reach their goals, as well as it informs you how you're doing and can direct you in which direction you need to go next to help the students reach their goals. Summative, that's like the evaluation part, like the grades you have to associate with their understanding of the content. So whether or not they understand, how are we going to know that? Actually, that's a really good question that I've been asking a lot lately. So I just want to say, like, right off the bat, it's like if they demonstrate it, if they understand it, if they can teach somebody else it, if they can explain the topic in their own words, or like even better, like design their own questions. That's going to actually demonstrate whether or not they understand something. Where traditionally it's more like, could they apply the procedure? Could they take the examples we've been doing and repeat with new numbers? If you don't know yet, I'm in math. So I think it's not a good thing if we're not asking if they understand. So that kind of brings back to like my issue with grades. Like your final grade after the semester is supposed to be, now that I understand, like the percent of your understanding of all the outcomes. So how can we be putting grades attached to things like homework checks or projects? Like, my problem comes into the fact that a student could understand a concept and be very good at it, but maybe they're not good at time management, have other things going on, so they don't do the project. So you can't exactly give them a 0 or only use the project to assess that student, because their grade should reflect the fact that they actually do understand it. So that's where I'm kind of learning about assessment is going to need to be it needs to be adaptable. It needs to be able, it can't be as rigorous as I originally thought or was like taught to me. So back when we were working on the rubric for assignment 1, we were talking in small groups, and I thought I was having some like really great conversations about how we should assess on the learning goals and our like perceived outcomes that have to do with like education, and we talked about tests and assessment. And then when we came together as a whole, I actually found it shocking how so many students seem to have like a different focus. Because they were right off the bat coming up with assessment criteria that had to do with the product. Had to do with like the quality of the video, the quality of the sound, editing, the number of takes you can take, whether the format actually like meets the style of, say, a Rick Mercer rant. But like this is kind of where I like disagree with my classmates, because we're supposed to assess our students on their knowledge of the outcomes. So when I'm looking at that, I go, okay, so is assignment 1 about my ability as a filmmaker? Like, is that why we're focusing on those criteria? Like, I get there is a line between like whether or not I produce something that has good enough quality to be assessed, versus getting distracted. And it's like if you ask your students to make a brochure, like marking it for its quality of being a brochure versus marking it for the content that's in it. So going into assumptions, so there's of course the assumption that the students have to create these wonderful products to be assessed, as well as the assumption I talked about that students actually have to complete everything you ask them in order to get a good grade. As well as another assumption is that like all students have to do the same product or assessment tool. But that's not very equitable. So something I've kind of like worked towards is like I've come around to the idea that like students should be assessed by their strengths. I kind of butted heads with some students a bit because it was kind of talking about how we want students to be comfortable and they should do things within their comfort zone. So why make students do presentations if that's like not for them? We assess them in a different way. And I kind of butted heads in the way that I still think all students should participate in a variety of like learning techniques or presentations, because we're supposed to help the students meet their potential. As teachers, like we should be pushing kids outside of their comfort zones so they can like grow and learn. But so I kind of had to come around a little bit to be like, on top of that, the assessment part should still happen in like on their strength. So if I had a whole class do presentations and one student not being comfortable ends up not doing very well, I may have to add an additional piece where we have a one-on-one conversation to assess her knowledge on the content. So because I'm grading her on what she understands for the learning goals that we're achieving, not whether or not they can participate. But of course, I still think it's a good idea that they participate in the presentations. My biggest argument against, I guess, the teachers here is that I was the student. If I could have opted out of doing presentations, I would have. Like, I'm talking, like, I am terrified, shaking paper, awful. But I was constantly pushed outside my comfort zone, and I got better like every year in school, like worked harder, and I'm here in education. And sometimes I argue that I wouldn't have made it here if I could just stay within my like strength bubble at school. So I spent some time brainstorming with some classmates about my growth, like how I've changed. And it was kind of great because they noticed things in me that I didn't quite pick up on. So kind of going along the lines of like what should we be assessing, They were like, Tara, you used to be like, nope, if it's late, 10% off, or stuff like that. Like, that's how I learned, and I kind of was like, deadlines, deadlines, deadlines. But then, like, kind of like reflecting, I, of course, have benefited through this educational degree on getting some extensions. Like, things happen. I can't get everything done. Also, in the real world, like, there are deadlines, but it's like a collaboration, and you can talk to your bosses about, like, hey, like, this project is going to take another week. Like, that's reality. So I've actually come around the idea, like, what are like late marks? Like, that's against what we're supposed to be, my beliefs on what we're supposed to be assessing. I can't just take off marks because the student wasn't able to meet the time frames, because that's not what marks mean. That's kind of back to what I used to think they mean, that the grade also reflects your studiousness, so your ability to like complete work on time is included in that, versus your grade should just match your actual understanding of the content. So, okay, kind of bring it back to like the concept checks I talked about, which is something that I want to learn more about this summer. I already have that worked out, because I'm thinking that's the route I want to go with assessment. So I see it as the students have the whole semester to like show me or demonstrate to me their understanding of the content, and it's my job to keep arranging situations for them to learn the material. So the way a concept check works is, for each like unit or outcome, they're gonna have like these mini, you can think of them as quizzes. And then so they do their little thing, and then out comes a grade on like how do they understand the content. So if they don't do poorly, they're allowed as many rewrites as they want. So I'm imagining it as once a week they can rewrite that, because if it takes them the whole semester to finally understand Unit 1, then that's perfectly fine and they shouldn't be penalized. So don't get me wrong, I'm still going to use traditional forms of assessment in my math classes, but I also really look forward to adapting and bringing in alternative forms as well. Math class is really seen as like practice, repeat, test, practice, repeat, test, example. But I think there's lots of outcomes that could be done differently, and I think it would be a great change of pace for students, and kind of get rid of some stigmas of hating math to go about it another way. So I love manipulatives. So I think that there's lots of opportunity to be like, here, I brought in a bunch of stuff. You're welcome to use it to explain your understanding to me. Some problems I do foresee kind of come from my pre-internship. I did some hands-on activities with the kids, I did an open task, and I assigned a project. So I actually brought in a little bit of creativity, and they kind of had to backwards like design their own question. It was a Venn diagram. And the kids did really well. So then we had done some traditional questions for practice too, and then it surprised me in the unit test a concept that they were having trouble with, because my like formative and summative assessment on their project says like they were understanding it, whereas the test said they didn't. So I like a bit of growth for me. I struggled there. If I had more time, I probably would have retested, I guess, the kids in another way, so that I could feel like more confident in what I was saying they understood or didn't understood. So maybe because I did so many hands-on activities that they weren't used to seeing the question in the format of a test. So that's something I guess I'm always going to struggle with, is like whether or not I'm correct in my assessment of their knowledge. But all we can do is try, learn, grow, and if things have to be retested, just be humble and work with the students to make sure that we have things correct. So thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great summer.